Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. And those who submitted questions, thank you very much. And as always, thank you very much to Miriam Friedman for organizing. It's definitely helpful and would not happen without someone on top of me. So thank you very much, Miriam. Um, I should just mention, God willing, we'll talk about all kinds of Purim related things. One of the greatest ideas of Purim is bringing simcha to other people. I do believe there are some new cases in the shul helping hands of people looking for meals and the like. I think including on Purim, people who would like to do chesed and particularly in this time of year help people who are having medical difficulties or other difficulties. You can contact Miriam Friedman. Again, it's certainly in a very appropriate time of year. If a person has a little bit more time and energy, it's a great time to chip in. Okay, there happen to have not been so many questions submitted, so I'll talk about the questions submitted, and then we'll open it up for general questions, whether it be specifically related to Purim on Friday, which is the official topic for tonight, or just general Purim questions are fine too. Okay, um, question number one, and people are definitely wondering about this in one way or another. What's the definition of a Suda for these purposes? God willing, hopefully we'll have nice Friday night meals. And so maybe a person doesn't feel like having a full-fledged Suda this year for Purim. Is that okay? Is that not okay? And what is the minimum definition of a Suda? What's the minimum? So very interesting. I don't even think it's clearly delineated in halacha that a person even has to have bread at this Suda. I don't think so. Now, having said that, um, it should be a nice meal. It should be a meal that a person feels good about. It should be a meal. The idea of the Purim Suda is it's a way to celebrate the great miracle of Purim. Unless a person had a specific medical reason not to wash, I really think it would be a good idea. I can't say it's the absolute halacha, but I would strongly suggest that the bare minimum a person has hamotzi, and then beyond having a motzi, it should be a nice meal. So I would not say it has to be fleischigs, but it should be what a person thinks of as a nice meal. And of course, we all define that we're all different and we all have different likes and expectations, etc. But I would strongly encourage people to at least have hamotzi, and it should be some form of a nice meal. Um, I would even say your yotz without having a hamantashen at the Suda, but it's a good idea. It's a good idea to have hamantash. But okay, what might be the more pressing question that's on people's minds is what's the timing for this Suda? When is the Suda supposed to be eaten on Friday? Of course, just to lay out the issue, as I'm sure many of us recognize, Friday night there's a meal. There's a real concept in halacha of creating a situation where a person will have an appetite for Friday night. If we would have a big meal Friday afternoon, that wouldn't be good in terms of the Purim Suda, in terms of the Friday night meal. So what's the story? So there's all kinds of approaches, but the basic approach laid out by the Ramah, which of course is the classic Ashkenazi method, is that a person is supposed to have the Suda before Chatzos, before halachic midday. It is worthwhile noting that the clocks will have changed by Purim. So Chatzos is 1:17. Now, what do we mean when we say have the meal by Chatzos? It would seem to be ideal to be finished with the meal by Chatzos, or at least to have a significant portion of the meal by Chatzos, the bulk of the meal by Chatzos. But the bottom line is the common practice among many is just to make it one's business to at least begin the Suda before Chatzos. So that would seem to be the standard halacha that a person should begin the Suda before Chatzos. If a person didn't begin the Suda before Chatzos, what happens then? Are they out? Is it just forget it? So the halacha would seem to be that though it's certainly appropriate to have it before chatzos, if it's after chatzos and a person has not yet begun the suda, they should certainly still have the suda, but they have a much greater responsibility in halacha to eat in a way that they're still going to have an appetite for Friday night. And if they feel that they're not going to have an appetite for Friday night, if they eat, X, Y, or Z, they really shouldn't be eating it. The absolute latest time that a person really, really, really has to have begun a Suda by is 9 hours into the day, which is around 4:15. So again, just to repeat the basics, the basic idea would seem to be that a person should at least wash and preferably have some significant part of the meal before 1:17. If a person is washing later than 1:17, a person really has to be diligent to not eat too big of a meal, and really it would not be appropriate normally to begin the meal after 4:15 by any means. But I should mention that there is another option. I personally wouldn't encourage the option. I think there's a lot of pitfalls to this option, but there is another option, and some of you might be familiar with the term or might have read about it online, which is pores mappa, which is the scenario as follows: that a person may begin the Purim meal sometime before sunset, and then wash and eat, and then um, take whatever bread it is, cover it. That's the language in the Gemara of pores mappa, spread out a tablecloth. Sometime before Shkia, before sunset, a person would stop eating, would put a cover on the bread, and then they would daven Kabbalah Shabbos. Probably Marav makes sense at that point. Also, though it's not an absolute obligation. And then they would make Kiddush. And then they would make Hamotzi. Sorry, not make Hamotzi. They would eat Hamotzi. And then it would shift into being a Friday night meal. So maybe just by a nod or shake of the head, just give me a sense. Did people follow that one?
Repeat.
Repeat. Okay. Okay. We already fulfilled Ad Lo Yada Menashe. That's very impressive. Okay. So again, there is an option in halacha. Let's say the person, I don't know what time Shkia will be once the clock changes. Let's say Shkia is, 6:30. I don't know. Okay.
7:14.
Thank you. Let's say Shkia is 7:14. So let's say a person sits down to have their Purim meal at 6 o'clock on Purim. 6 o'clock, much more similar to how we would normally do it on a Purim, by the way, like later in the day. They eat their meal, they do their thing. And then sometime before 7:14 is Shkia, person stops. Whatever bread they have on the table, person would cover it with like a challah cover, a tablecloth, or napkin, or whatever it is. And then a person would daven Kabbalah Shabbos. And many would recommend at that point also davening Mariv. And then a person would come back to the table and make Kiddush. And then from that point on, they're now officially eating the Shabbos meal. That's an interesting. It's an interesting.
I have two questions of that. So the first one is Shtei Alechem. You have to bring two more loaves with what they
You know
have?
what, Steve? I'm sorry. I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of questions on this. Let me just get through the basics first, and then I'll be happy to take. Okay. But that's the thank you. So, and I was going to say that. So here's the story. In this option, a person would not bench in between. So basically, they first had the Purim Suda, and then they shifted into the Shabbos meal. It was sort of all one big meal. They broke in the middle for sunset. They daven Kabbalah Shabbos after sunset. Then they make Kiddush for Shabbos, and then they keep on eating. It's an interesting option. It sounds very exciting. I mean, when you think it through, I don't know. I'm not sure it's the best option for many. Anyone who wants to daven with a minyan that night, it's probably not a very good option for, unless you got a lot of people with you. But if a person, let's say, wasn't going to daven in shul anyway for whatever reason, it is interesting. It is interesting. And I will be but again, this is all like not standard run of the mill. But I should, full disclosure, that option does exist. The most common thing to do is to just wash before 1:17. And then that's the Purim meal. And then later in the evening, you have the Shabbos meal. Okay. Okay, there's another interesting question posed over here, which is Purim Misholosh. The Purim Misholosh, we do not have Purim Misholosh this year. Purim Misholosh means a three-pronged Purim. But it is true that in Yerushalayim this year, there is a Purim Misholosh. So a person just wanted to know how that works. Let me explain. Um, let me explain how that works. First of all, Shushan Purim. I always used to think when I was a kid in school that Shushan Purim was just a glorified way of saying it's the day after Purim, so the kids can bring in, their costumes. Shushan Purim is, of course, a halachically significant thing. The reason Purim is the date that it is because the Jews fought against their enemies on the 13th of Adar, and then the next day, the 14th of Adar, was a day of celebration of their victory. And that's the day that we celebrate as Purim. In the city of Shushan, the Jews took one more day to fight against their enemies, and so therefore the day of celebration wasn't the 14th of Adar because they were still fighting that day. The day of celebration was the 15th of Adar, and that's why it's called Shushan Purim, the Purim celebration in the city of Shushan. When the rabbis instituted the holiday of Purim, they felt that the unique celebration of the people of Shushan should be memorialized in some way for the future. So they wanted to create some type of community dynamic, that there would be communities that would observe Purim on the 15th. But any time that we're going to give honor to a specific community, we always look to give honor to Yerushalayim. So they set the rules in a way that put Yerushalayim in the category. So the rule is any city that was walled in the times of Yoshua ben Nun would celebrate Shushan Purim. It's basically just creating a framework that will fit Yerushalayim as the most prominent city. So in any event, as some of you, whoever has celebrated Purim in Israel before, there are, of course, many communities in Israel that the correct day to celebrate Purim is the 14th, just like the same way that you and I will be celebrating it. But in much of what we know as Yerushalayim, the correct day to celebrate is the 15th of Adar. Now, the 15th of Adar is Shabbos. So if you're in Yerushalayim, the celebration of Purim becomes very interesting. And actually, it ends up being a 3-day event. Leave it to the Jews to figure this one out. It ends up being a 3-day event. The main reason it's somewhat complicated is a halacha that we're very well familiar with, which is any special seasonal mitzvah that involves bringing something somewhere. We know that the rabbis say if the day falls out on Shabbos, we don't want you observing it on Shabbos, because the rabbis were worried that there'd be a community that didn't have an Eruv, and a person would have a Shaila, and they'd end up taking it somewhere. So the same way, for example, we know when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbos, we don't blow shofar. So the rabbis said when Purim falls out on Shabbos, which doesn't happen in our calendars for the 14th of Adar, but it does happen for the 15th of Adar, Shushan Purim. So they said that when Purim falls out on Shabbos, we don't want people reading the Megillah on Purim. So what, are we going to cancel the Megillah? No. We read the Megillah the day before. So in Yerushalayim this year, it's a great kind of brain teaser. When in Yerushalayim, would they read Megillah on the 14th? This is when they read Megillah on the 14th. So the Megillah is read on Thursday night and Friday. Interestingly, there's one other mitzvah that's done on Friday, which is Matanos Levyonim, gifts to the poor, because that idea is laid out in Megillas Esther. So it makes sense to observe the mitzvah of Matanos Levyonim the same day we're observing the mitzvah of Megillah. So that's on Friday. So that's Friday. Come Shabbos, that's Purim in Yerushalayim. So they say Al Hanisim in davening and in benching. Okay. But they didn't want to have the Purim Suda on Sunday. There's a Gemara Yerushalmi that talks about this. The reason they don't want to have the Purim Suda on Shabbos, excuse me. The reason they don't want to have the Purim Suda on Shabbos is because you would have a nice Suda on Shabbos anyway. We want there to be a special celebration of Purim. And therefore, the standard practice is that the meal is eaten on Sunday. So Megillah is read on Friday, Thursday night and Friday. In conjunction with Megillah, Matanos Levyonim is given on Friday. Al Hanisim is said in davening and in benching on Shabbos. And the Purim Suda is on Sunday. And in conjunction with the Purim Suda is the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos, because the Shloach Manos is thought of as connected to the Purim Suda, because like you're giving someone food so that they can eat it at the Purim Suda. So that's how a Purim Mishulash works. It's interesting. I saw today, uh, you know, us Jews, we figure out all the angles. So there are people that say, you should really do something for a Suda on Shabbos, if that's actually Purim. So they say you should serve something extra at the Shabbos meal, something you normally wouldn't serve at the Shabbos meal. That's in honor of Purim. And then they say you should make sure to have a guest at the Shabbos day meal, and that's in lieu of Shalach Manos. That's pretty interesting, but that's not the standard thing. Okay, we're almost done with the submitted questions. I have to confess, I had to give a double take when I read the question. The question was, do we say Tachanun on Sunday? I thought to myself, what kind of question is that? Do we say Tachanun on Sunday? So here's the story. It seems that, well, not seems, it's the standard practice in Shushan, in Yerushalayim, in places that observe Shushan Purim, if Sunday is a day that they're celebrating with a Purim Suda, it makes sense not to say Tachanun on Sunday, even though it's not Shushan Purim, even though Shabbos was Shushan Purim, but they're still celebrating Purim in a sense with the Purim Suda, so they don't say Tachanun. So there are those who say that even communities that don't observe Shushan Purim, in recognition of that, should also not say Tachanun. But I looked at our standard Eses Torah Luach, and our Eses Torah Luach does not have it. So for sure, I will say that we should say Tachanun on Sunday, but it's a very interesting question, and I thank the person who submitted that very interesting question. But it seems to be standard in Yerushalayim this year. On Sunday, they won't say Tachanun. Okay, let me just first see what's in the chat. I think I dealt with Menashe. I think I dealt with yours, right? Right, okay. Well, that's so interesting. Somebody told me about a shul in Memphis that's doing this sort of, Purim Suda / Friday night dinner, the way we described it. And then someone wrote into me that Kesher in Georgetown is doing it. Very interesting. Very nice. Thank you very much. Steve.
Yeah, so I had two questions. The first question was the Shelechem, where you're covering the meal, because you're going to make washing over two, but you started a meal. So how does that work? The other one was, if you're partaking sufficiently in the alcohol, how do you daven Marav if you are in the middle of the Suda?
Yeah. Okay. Both interesting questions. I just want to make sure we're all on the. I should clarify, Steve, that this thing that's in my cup is coffee. It's not not anything. I want to clarify that.
Yeah, clarify. Sure.
Um, so we know, of course, that on Friday night, part of the Friday night meal is we make hamotzi over 2 rolls or 2 loaves or whatever it is, 2 whole things of bread. So Steve's question is, how does that work in terms of this situation? So I believe the way it would work, in other words, I don't think a person benches in between. So they make hamotzi on whatever they make hamotzi on for the Purim Suda. And then what I believe they would do is they would go straight, Kabbalah Shabbos, Mariv, and then Kiddush. Now, according to this, they wouldn't need to make a new hamotzi, but I think, when they're going to take from bread, they should, before they have more bread, they should just for a moment hold 2 loaves together without saying a bracha hamotzi, but just, kind of hold the 2 loaves together before they take from the bread. That's what I would assume.
Okay.
I think so. Your second question is one of the big pitfalls with this whole plan that some people do. If they drink at their Purim Suda, it's probably not going to be very conducive to a meaningful Mariv. I will, and then that's a very practical consideration. I will mention that there's discussion. It seems that given that Kabbalah Shabbos is supposed to happen before Kiddush, but technically speaking, a person may daven Mariv after the meal. So theoretically speaking, a person could kind of, sober up over the course of the Shabbos meal and daven Mariv afterwards. I don't plan on doing any of that, to be honest with you, but that's how that would play out. Thank you, Steve. Okay. Okay, that's a very good question. Someone posed the question, is there a need to hear Megillah before the Purim Suda? May a person hear Megillah in the afternoon after the Purim Suda? It's a really good question. It definitely makes sense to hear Megillah before the Purim Suda. It definitely makes sense to do that. Having said that, if a person, for whatever reason, wasn't able to get around to it, it does make sense to create some kind of external reminder for a person that they not forget about hearing Megillah. It's a big concern in halacha in general when we eat meals that we're going to get carried away with the meal and forget things. There's all kinds of examples through the year of that kind of stuff. So it would be better to hear Megillah before having the Purim Suda, but if it didn't work out that way, it's okay. But I would just recommend having some like alarm go off, when it's time to go to the Megillah reading or something, and make sure to set the alarm before you begin the Purim Suda. Hope I answered that question. Okay, someone asked what the minimum for Matanos Levyonim is. So just to understand what the parameters are for Matanos Levyonim, Matanos Levyonim is supposed to be to give a significant item that will help with the meal, give one significant item to each of two people. So I think if you gave somebody $5, I think we've gone a little bit with inflation by this point. I think this is a higher number than I used to say. But if you give somebody, thank you, Menashe, if you give somebody $5, they could go to Shalom and buy something that would be minimal for a meal. They might not be able to buy a corned beef sandwich from the guys behind the counter, but if they could definitely buy a roll from somewhere else in the store and get a few pieces of bologna or something from behind the counter, and they definitely cover that with $5. So that would be a minimal meal. So I would say if you theoretically gave $5 to okay, thank you, Yosefi. Thank you very much. Not bad at all. But if you gave, for those who can't see the chat, Yosefi wrote they can buy a shank bone for Pesach, referring to $5. If you gave $5 to each of two people, they could definitely buy something that would be significant towards a meal with that. So I would say you fulfill your mitzvah Matanos Levyonim with $10. I would say that every bar or bas mitzvah person in the household should be giving at least $10 for Matanos Levyonim. That would be my recommendation. I will remind everybody, it's brought down that if there's one mitzvah that a person makes sense to spend more money on than the other things, it's Matanos Levyonim. Shalach Manos is a really lovely mitzvah, and there's nothing wrong with giving to all kinds of people. That's great. But Matanos Levyonim is even more meaningful to give, more overboard, so to say. So I would say that per person fulfilling the mitzvah, I would say $10 makes sense. That's what I would recommend. I want to point out, Menashe was kind enough. This is a new thing, thanks to our executive director, Menucha Singer-Wolf. She set up an online sign up for Matanos Levyonim. You could donate online, and that's my Matanos Levyonim distribution. That will be open, God willing, until late Purim night. I will mention that just because of the crush in terms of getting everything done on Friday, personally, for me, for my Matanos Levyonim collection, I'm not going to take any more in the morning. In other words, my deadline for giving for Matanos Levyonim, for people giving to me, will be either Purim night in Shul, or you can donate online until 11:59 that night. But I just need the time to be able to tally it up and figure out what I'm giving to who. And I just need to get right to it on Friday morning because it's a short day. Thank you for that, Menashe. Okay, I hope I answered that Matanos Levyonim question. Huh. Interesting. Question as follows. Is it better to hear Megillah in the morning? I guess that means versus hearing it in the afternoon after Purim Suda. I guess that was the thing. Or to give Shalach Manos with the family in the morning? It's an interesting question. In other words, a person either can... It's interesting. I would say that if a person is sure they'll get a Megillah reading later and they'll have like that reminder after the Suda to go, if they feel they're really going to miss out from the whole Purim experience, I would say it makes sense to kind of give Shalach Manos with the family, as long as a person has a very clear plan for how they're going to be able to hear Megillah later. Interesting question. Interesting question. Thank you for sharing that. Any other questions? I'll mention one or two other things. I'll just mention this is always it always comes up. This is just sort of like an FYI that people in Avelos um, aren't aren't supposed to receive shalach manas and are just supposed to give one shalach manas and three yotzedits, and that's that. So just you know, if the worst thing they said about me after 120 years was that I gave shalach manas to an avalon Purim, I'd feel very, very good. But just so that people sometimes it creates some angst for Avelim actually, because they don't know what to do with it sometimes, and people ask me the question a lot. But just for people's knowledge, it's not a bad thing to be aware that if a person's in Avelos, the normal practice is not to give them shalach manas and Purim. Now I'll tell you that people who are part of a household, I always tell people that doesn't apply to the whole household. In other words, if one member of the household is in Avelis, one can still bring shalach manas to the household in general. But just to keep that in mind. Thank you, Elaine. Important question. Women are just as obligated to hear it twice as everybody else. Women are just as obligated to hear it twice as men are. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. The nature of the mitzvah of Megillah reading is it's fascinating that it's a once at night and once during the day. It's very unique in that regard. But the Rabbanan instituted that even though it's a positive time-bound mitzvah, and one might think that women would be exempt from it, the halach is that women are obligated because of the central role that Esther played in the story. Afein hayabos anes. They were also involved with that miracle. Basically, we should eat the Purim Suda. We should wash before 1:17 on Friday. Anything else? Interesting. Do the usual rules about women dressing as a man apply? If I remember correctly, there are poskim that are more lenient about that on Purim, but a person should still be clear that it would be appropriate for it to be evident that it's a woman, as opposed to really tricking people. But we are more lenient about that on Purim, if I remember correctly. Thank you. Oh, interesting. Um, this is an interesting question. We all have mitzvahs of Purim. One of the mitzvahs of Purim is shalach manos. So in a household of two or four or five or whatever, all the bar bas mitzvah people in the household are obligated. So is there something to be said for a person specifically giving their own shalach manos? So the truth is, it probably does make sense. It probably does make sense for at least one shalach manos on Purim for everyone. By the way, it could be that a person is giving shalach manos on behalf of the person. We know that we can be yotzi shalach manos through a proxy, but it probably does make sense for every member of the household either to directly give somebody shalach manos or to someone give shalach manos on their behalf. I think that's true. Okay, thanks. What else? I'll buy a little more time. People always ask about what the exact parameters are of the mitzvah of shalach manos. The basic parameters, this is a real misconception. You do not have to give two different brachos. It should just be two different types of food. So when teaching a high school halacha class, and I told the students, I said, your nursery school teacher misled you. They don't have to be two different brachos. They can just be two different types of food. I can give shalach manos. I can give an apple and an orange for shalach manos, even though they're both bar prioates. I shouldn't give two different types of pretzels because those aren't really two different types of food. In any event, the kid raises her hand and says, Rabbi Rosenbaum, I went to Shomrai Nursery. So I changed the subject as quickly as possible. But, but that's okay. But it should be, it can be two different types of food. The food should be ready to eat. You could give more foods that aren't ready to eat, but in terms of what's counting, they should be ready to eat foods, and they should be at least what would be considered a significant portion. In other words, I shouldn't give like one little pretzel and one cracker. That wouldn't be normal. I can give, a little bag of pretzels and a little bag of crackers, for example. Okay. Any other questions? Sorry, I guess it was. Oh, yes. Thank you for asking that. As long as the package includes 2 foods that are ready to eat and are different types of foods and are of significant amount, non-food items can be included, or not ready to eat food items can be included. That's true too. I should also mention that drinks can count as this as well. There's a whole discussion about water or seltzer and does that work? Does that not work? You get different opinions about that. But certainly, grape juice, wine, juice, whatever it is, all those would certainly count as one of the 2 items. That's for sure. It's very interesting. As some of you might remember, our oldest, Yosef, was born on Purim afternoon. And so I have many fond memories of that day, but I have fond memories of trying to make sure we fulfilled all the mitzvahs of Purim. Tara and I, we went to the hospital before Purim reading, before Megillah reading Purim night. And, Yosef was born in the afternoon. But so we figured out Megillah reading, however we figured it out. Matanos Lavionam I had donated to, Rabbi Einer's collection before Purim, But Shalach Manis, and someone was kind enough to bring us a Purim Suda in the hospital. It was very nice. Shalach Manis, we had to figure out what we were going to do for Shalach Manis. So it dawned on me that this very wonderful fellow who brought me the Purim Suda, I stopped for a moment. I said, wait, don't leave. I have to give you Shalach Manis. So I had a granola bar in my pocket. And I said to him, come with me to the soda machine and I'll buy you a soda. And so I gave him a granola bar and I bought him a soda, and that was Shalach Manis. And I was Yotze with that. And he told me later, he said that was the best Shalach Manis the whole day. It was somewhat filling, and the soda kept him going as he was driving around. But by the way, pursuant to what we were talking about, so I had only given 1 Shalach Manis. And both myself and my wife were obligated. So there was another woman in the community that had given birth like Purim night. Yosef was born Purim afternoon. She had given birth the night before. So we realized that she was down the hall in the I forgot the name of that section, but after the people give birth. So I was a Tara Shliach, like I said before, he could be someone's proxy. And so I brought it down the hall to her for a Tara so that we each fulfilled Shalach Manis. Okay, I see there's more questions that came in. I am not aware of any requirement to actually give a food and a drink. In other words, there should be 2 items. It's okay to be a food and a drink, but I'm not aware of anything that it has to be a food and a drink. I have a mitzvah, just to clarify, Ariel, I have a mitzvah to give 1 package of Shalach Manos to someone. I have a mitzvah to give 2 foods to 1 person. I think it makes sense to say that at least one of them is from this one and one of them is from that one. Yeah, that's a good idea, Yosefi. Yeah, sorry. That maybe that would have been a better story. Sorry. Thank you for pointing it out. Out of curiosity, can you fulfill Shalach Manos with a shank bone, by the way? Sorry. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Sorry, it was a little bit on the skimpy side. Thank you all for bearing with me. And I see there's one more message. Oh, thank you. And we will, God willing, we'll have another one of these before Pesach. This year Erev Pesach is Shabbos, so that I think is going to be a little more complicated than this discussion with Purim on a Friday. But wishing everyone a wonderful Purim, and may Klal Yisrael, and particularly our brothers and sisters in Israel, have great Yeshuos, great salvations in connection with this Purim. And
Amen.
At its core, Purim is a day that we believe and reinforce the recognition that Hashem is always present and his ability to direct world events is always there. And we should merit to see a tremendous reminder of that. That should invigorate our tefillos in these days, and we should merit to see a modern day reminder of that.
Amen.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Well, everyone. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.